Welcome to Policy on Demand. I'm Sindhu Blume.
And I'm Scott McCandless. It's the week of November 6th, and this is your Monday briefing. The House and Senate are in session this week and have less than 2 weeks to take action to avoid a government shutdown before the current government funding expires on November 17th. There are several hearings happening this week, and details about those are in the description of this episode. Sindhu?
Thanks, Scott. Government funding remains a looming topic in Washington, and to that end, House Speaker Mike Johnson has proposed extending government funding on a temporary basis to January 15th. Joining us to share their insights on all of this and more are Todd Metcalf and Karl Russo. Todd, Karl, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having us.
So, Todd, let's talk about this November 17th deadline, which seems a little tight. Talk about what they're hoping to accomplish and how heavy of a lift is this?
The main thing they want to do, obviously, is keep the government open. They want to avoid a shutdown. And I think that as a general matter, that's a consensus position. It's sort of, what do they want to do beyond that, if anything? You've got, the president has sent a request for supplemental funding for Israel, for Ukraine, for additional domestic priorities. Will some or all of that also sort of find its way into the November 17th package? Or does that have to wait until later in the year? There's also, frankly, an effort to add tax to sort of build up the urgency to say, we may not have a typical end of the year tax bill. This may be the last train leaving the station. And so maybe we need to work on finding that deal, that compromise on those TCJA extenders, on the child tax credit and whatever else, now, not later, because later may not be an option.
Just to follow up on that, how heavy of a lift is this?
It is highly unusual for a CR, a continuing resolution, that temporary government funding bill, to carry any sort of policy matters. And so to the extent it does, it's normally reauthorizing programs that may also have expired at a particular time, but usually only for the duration of that continuing resolution. So it's very unusual to see like big matters like tax policy or broader things that might be permanent or for a couple of years. It's rare for those to be carried on bills like that. So it's not a heavier lift in the sense that like the cost of the bill's the same. It's just what they're trying to put it on, what the vehicle is different.
So Todd, with the CR, a lot of our viewers are watching for a year-end tax bill. So if this moves to January 15th, what does that look like? Does the year-end tax bill, does it go into the CR or something else?
The first and highest priority right now is for the tax writers from the House and Senate to reach an agreement on what is the scope of any tax bill. So we know that they're interested in trying to get all three of the TCJA extenders done. We know that Democrats have said, okay, we'll do that, but we want equal or parity funding for the child tax credit, some expansion of the child tax credit. So we know that they're working on getting that deal. The hope is to get that deal before November 17th so that even though it's unusual for legislation to ride on a continuing resolution, they will be ready to go if they're called, sort of like the sixth man on the basketball team. Like, you need to go, coach wants you to go in. They want to be ready to go in if called. So they're trying to get that done. And the reason that they're trying to get that done is January 15th, which is the date that has been discussed, or January 15th or around there. That would mean that for retroactivity, for the provisions that, Section 174, which changed at the beginning of last year, to go back and keep make it continuous or seamless, have full retroactivity, January 15th would actually set a record or a precedent for going back further than we've gone back in the past. And so there's some concern about retroactivity there. I personally am not so concerned about, I think the last time, Karl can correct me if I'm wrong, it was 23 and a half months. This would be 24 and a half months. So in the grand scheme of things, is this really earth shattering? The answer is that is probably no.
Okay.
If there's a will to get it done, it will get done. But the other interesting thing that they're looking at right now also is, while January 15th is sort of the initial proposal from the speaker, there are some others, both in the House and the Senate, are saying, maybe January 15th is too far off. Maybe we need to figure out a way to get to December 15th.
Right.
In that instance, I don't necessarily know that it makes it easier to get these tax provisions done than January 15th or November 17th, but it does sort of shift it more into the traditional cadence of an end-of-year bill. But at the end of the day, there is a sense of urgency among the tax writers to try to get this in place as early as possible. So whatever vehicle arises, whenever it's available, they're ready to go.
Okay.
Karl, in terms of some of those numbers, let's focus on the differences between the House and the Senate. What is their difference in terms of numbers from the government funding perspective?
So the debt limit deal that was reached earlier this year set spending caps for discretionary spending at $1.59 trillion. And the Senate has generally written its appropriations bill with that figure in mind. The House, on the other hand, has targeted fiscal year 2022 levels of funding, and that's about $100 to $120 billion less. Now, neither the House nor the Senate have passed all of the appropriations bills out, so we don't really know exactly where the difference will be. If you take a look at the three bills that were covered by the minibus that passed the Senate last week, they were about $30 billion more for the overlapping provisions compared to what the House provisions were. Now, neither of those consider any of the supplemental appropriations related to Ukraine or Israel and what the differences could potentially be between the chambers on those items.
So, Karl, we talked about government funding, but what about this tax package? In terms of dollars, how far apart are Republicans and Democrats on the potential tax package?
If you look at the cost of the three business provisions in the TCJ that are at issue here, they're about $47 billion to extend them through 2025 and line them up with the individual title expirations. And I think that there's general agreement that there will be some changes that the Democrats have been asking for on the child credit, possibly the earned income tax credit, of equal magnitude to those measures. So if you're looking at those all in, you're somewhere in the neighborhood of $95 billion, equally balanced between those provisions. There are a few other things that, depending on the timing of the bill, would have to ride along with that. But those are generally the bipartisan extension of the Federal Aviation Administration funding taxes. So I think those would be included, in any bill. Whether or not anything else gets to ride on that package, I think, is still a somewhat open question, though it is much less likely that you see other provisions get added at this point.
All right, and finally, I can't think of a better way to start off a week than to ask this following question. And Todd, I want to start with you. So as you're speaking with companies, could you share what you're recommending that they consider as they look at all of this activity in Washington?
Well, on the tax front, which is where we spend most of our time talking, what we're hearing from the Hill is there's a lot of interest in the business community at getting these TCJA extenders done, getting them done by the end of the year. There is a sense of urgency in the business community, but that sense of urgency is not being communicated to leadership in the Senate, to leadership in the House. And so the best thing that companies can do right now is either the CEO, the CFO, their government relations folks, reach out to their members of Congress, their senators, and say, look, this needs to get done and this needs to get done now. And please go tell your leaders that this needs to get done now. Give that sense of urgency to the members that this needs to get done.
Okay. Karl.
I would just add to that, these provisions are going to ride together. And so even if you don't have a significant interest in, say, the interest limitation, but you really care about R&D, then you need to make that same case, because they are going to travel as a package. And just to reiterate the importance of getting something done before the end of the year and to make sure that that's registering up on the Hill, right, so that it gets included in any package if the opportunity arises.
Okay. Thank you both so much. Really appreciate you translating and interpreting for us.
Thank you.
And for our viewers, you'll find a link to the latest Week in Review with Rohit Kumar in the description of this episode. Another Week in Review follows this Friday.
And thank you, as always, for spending this time with us. Stay with Policy on Demand for the latest developments from Washington and around the world. Take care.